It started on a Saturday morning, so still you could hear the sound of cicadas over the hum of the distant highway. The kind of Texas heat that makes metal tools too hot to touch and sweat sting your eyes before you've done a minute of work. I remember the dirt under my boots, the faint creak of the gate behind me, and the rhythmic thud of my post-hole digger cutting through dry clay. I wasn't building anything grand, just a simple fence for a bit of privacy. But in Maplewood Estates, even breathing too loud could turn into a federal offense. The calm shattered with a sound I'll never forget. Whoop whoop. Police sirens fast, close. Gravel sprayed across my driveway as 3 squad cars skidded to a stop, engines rumbling in unison. I froze, one hand still on the fence post, the other wiping grit from my forehead. Doors slammed. 3 officers stepped out with that careful, rehearsed stance, one hand on the belt, the other resting near the holster. And behind them, like a movie villain stepping into her own spotlight, came Cordelia Blackthorne. You could smell her perfume before you saw her. Heavy floral, expensive, artificial, like she was trying to cover something rotten. Her white Lexus gleamed in the sunlight, not a speck of dust on it. Her heels clicked sharply across my lawn as she crossed her arms and smiled that kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "There," she said, pointing at me as if I were a stray dog. "That man is trespassing on HOA property." For a moment I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. Then I realized the officers weren't laughing. One of them, a tall guy with mirrored sunglasses, asked for my ID. His voice was polite but tight, like he was trying to make sense of the absurdity. I could feel my neighbors watching from behind blinds, Marcus across the street, Mrs. Chen peeking out from her porch. The kind of quiet curiosity people have when they smell drama brewing. Cordelia was already packing like she owned the place. "He's putting up an illegal fence," she declared, waving a rolled-up document that looked like something she'd printed off a blog. "Violating community aesthetics and encroaching on HOA-maintained land." I didn't raise my voice, didn't move toward her, just reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out a neatly folded survey report stamped and certified. "Actually," I said evenly, "every post is 6 inches inside my property line, GPS verified." Her face tightened. You could almost hear the gears grinding behind those manicured temples. She snatched the papers from my hand, scanned them, and then, just like that, pulled out her phone. "I need police immediately," she barked, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "There's a man destroying community assets and refusing to leave." And she made that call while standing 10 feet inside my yard, trespassing while accusing me of trespassing. The irony was thick enough to taste. I didn't argue, just kept my camera rolling quietly in my pocket, lens catching her every word. Years of experience had taught me that silence can be more powerful than shouting. Let people write their own downfall. All you have to do is hit record. The officers stepped aside to speak privately. One of them turned toward me, recognition dawning behind his mirrored shades. He lowered his voice. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Cordelia stiffened. The look on her face was priceless, like watching a poker player realize she'd gone all in on a losing hand. But she didn't back down. "He's lying," she snapped. "You people need to arrest him before he ruins community property." One officer calmly gestured toward the orange survey flags marking my yard. "Ma'am, everything here checks out. He's within his rights. You're actually standing on his property." That silence afterward, it was better than any verdict. Cordelia turned on her heel, muttering something about aesthetic approvals as she marched back to her Lexus. The perfume lingered even after she drove off, mixing with the smell of dust and cedar. I went back to work, hammer in hand, pretending everything was normal, but my mind wasn't on the fence anymore. Something about that encounter felt deeper, uglier, like a mask slipping. Because you can always tell when power starts to panic. And Cordelia Blackthorne? She just realized the man she tried to humiliate wasn't the kind of neighbor who scared easily. The funny thing is, she had no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. That night the air in my kitchen felt heavier than usual, thick with the smell of sawdust and the faint metallic tang of sweat and cedar. I sat at the table surrounded by paperwork, surveyor receipts, HOA bylaws printed from a website so outdated it still used Comic Sans and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The neighborhood outside was quiet, almost too quiet. Porch lights glowed like watchful eyes. Somewhere, a sprinkler hissed rhythmically, counting off seconds in the dark. I replayed the morning in my head, the police cars, Cordelia's voice, the way she'd barked orders like she owned the department. And something kept gnawing at me. Confidence like that doesn't come from nowhere. She wasn't bluffing. She believed she was untouchable. I opened the HOA's Community Standards binder, the one they'd handed me when I moved in. Half the pages were copied crooked, a few still had coffee stains. There was nothing about fence placement that matched her claim. No clause, no rule, just vague talk about harmony and visual cohesion. The kind of language lawyers love because it means whatever the powerful want it to mean. I'd seen this pattern before, in courtrooms, in politics, in petty bureaucracies that confuse control with order. Give someone a little authority and watch how quickly they start to taste power. By midnight, I had the first hint of a plan. Nothing dramatic, no confrontation, just quiet, patient observation. The kind that makes bullies nervous without you saying a word. The next morning, the sun rose red over Maplewood Estates, turning the street into a river of gold. I laced up my boots and walked the block with my phone camera in hand, pretending to admire lawns. Marcus from across the street was already outside, nursing a mug of black coffee that steamed in the cool air. "She got you too, huh?" he said without preamble. I stopped, got me. He chuckled, bitter and knowing. "Cordelia, president, self-appointed queen, executioner of mailboxes and wind chimes, you're on her list now." He gestured with his mug toward his roof where solar panels gleamed. "She fined me 3 times for those, said they ruined the neighborhood aesthetic. You know what the fine was? $200 a day. I had to get a lawyer before she backed off." Mrs. Chen shuffled over from the corner house, holding a tray of cookies and stories of her own. Fined for excessive garden decor. The offense? 3 ceramic gnomes. Same kind half the neighborhood had. By the time I circled back to my driveway, I had a half-dozen testimonies and a clear picture of what Cordelia really was, a predator in pastel. She didn't lead an HOA. She ran a protection racket with paperwork. That evening I sat on my back porch as dusk painted the sky purple. The wooden boards creaked under my chair. Somewhere down the block, someone barbecued ribs. The smoke drifted sweet and slow. I opened my laptop and typed out a formal request for financial transparency, a homeowner's legal right to review the HOA's books. I kept my tone polite, almost deferential, the way I'd seen defendants speak before realizing they were walking into a trap. I sent the email and leaned back, listening to the night insects hum. One thing about small-time tyrants, they never expect resistance that sounds calm. 3 days later, her reply arrived, not from her, of course, from the board, a masterpiece of polite obstruction, records unavailable due to digitization delays, ongoing audit, appreciate your patience. I smiled, every excuse was evidence, every delay another breadcrumb. The following weekend, I decided to pay the HOA office a visit. Office was a generous term. It was a converted bedroom inside a community center that smelled faintly of air freshener trying to cover mildew. Cordelia sat behind a desk too big for the room, tapping a pen like a metronome of irritation. She didn't look up right away. Power move. I'd seen it 1,000 times in courtrooms, make them wait, make them small. When she finally met my eyes, the smile was pure venom wrapped in velvet. "Good morning, Mr. Webb. How can we help you today?" I noticed the we. Bullies always pluralize their authority. "Just following up on my record's request," I said evenly. "State law gives homeowners the right to review financials within 10 business days." Her jaw tightened. "We have procedures, sweetie. You'll be notified when the audit's complete." "Of course," I said. "Mind if I take a look at the posted budget while I'm here?" She hesitated, half a second, but enough. Then she waved a manicured hand toward the bulletin board. The budget was a joke. $500,000 collected yearly in dues, yet the community center's carpet looked like it had survived a flood. Landscaping fees that could fund a botanical garden. Maintenance costs with numbers that danced like lottery balls. I snapped a few discreet photos with my phone, while she pretended not to watch. By the time I left, she was still tapping that pen. The smell of her perfume followed me out the door like a warning. That night, the evidence spread across my dining table like a crime scene. Receipts, screenshots, photos of identical mailboxes and fences that hadn't earned violations. Each piece was small, but together they began to tell a story. And sitting there in the flickering kitchen light, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce: purpose. The calm, cold kind that comes right before a verdict. She thought she was dealing with another quiet homeowner, someone she could intimidate into compliance. She had no idea the man she'd tried to bully once wrote the laws she was breaking. I leaned back, the chair creaking softly beneath me, and let the thought settle like dust in a courtroom after the gavel falls. The game had changed. Cordelia just didn't know it yet. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops when I found the first envelope on my porch. Thick, cream-colored, official-looking, HOA letterhead printed dead center like a badge of authority. Inside, violation notice. Unauthorized landscaping modifications. Apparently, planting tomatoes in my backyard was an act of civil rebellion. I set the paper aside, more amused than angry, until the next day when another envelope showed up. Excessive outdoor storage. My garden hose, neatly wound on a reel, was now an eyesore. Wednesday, it was the doormat, non-compliant with community aesthetic. Thursday, parking violation for keeping my pickup in my own driveway. 4 days, 4 letters, $800 in fines. That's when amusement turned into something colder. Cordelia wasn't just flexing her power, she was trying to break me. By week's end, the harassment had spread beyond paper. Anonymous complaints to the city about construction noise. False reports to the police that I was running power tools after hours. It was psychological warfare, suburban style. No fists, no shouting, just an avalanche of paperwork designed to grind you down until you surrender. I'd seen this strategy before. Bureaucratic bullying, weaponizing process instead of reason. The kind of abuse that hides behind polite signatures and official stamps. But Cordelia had made one mistake. She assumed the man she was targeting didn't know how to fight back. So I started building something new, something stronger than a fence. Every violation went into a binder. Every email printed, time-stamped, categorized. I photographed other houses with identical offenses. Same garden hose, same mailboxes, same fence materials, no violations. I compiled screenshots of the HOA's Facebook posts, filled with thinly veiled digs about certain residents who think they're above the rules. And through it all, I stayed silent. No retaliation, no confrontation, just quiet documentation. Because the thing about tyrants is, they talk themselves into a corner if you let them. Marcus would drop by in the evenings, bringing a couple of beers and that look people get when they're too tired to keep pretending everything's fine. "You know," he said one night, leaning against my fence post, "you could move, she's not worth it." "Maybe not," I said, watching the fireflies blink across the yard. "But if everyone like us keeps leaving, she wins every time." Mrs. Chen brought cookies the next day, bless her. "You're not the first, dear," she whispered. "She scares people, but I think she's scared of you." Scared, maybe. Or maybe she just didn't know what kind of man she'd picked a fight with yet. 2 weeks later, Cordelia called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda: resident noncompliance and enforcement procedures. Translation, me. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. 3 board members sat up front, Cordelia in her white blazer, tapping a pen like she was conducting an orchestra of fear. Eleanor Vance, a retired teacher whose face said she regretted showing up. And Bob Morrison, the insurance guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. When they opened the floor for discussion, Cordelia didn't waste a second. "This homeowner," she began, her voice dripping with authority, "has repeatedly violated community standards, disrespected board directives, and created a hostile environment for other residents." I didn't say a word, just reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers that landed on the table with a satisfying thud. Here's documentation of identical properties with zero enforcement, I said calmly. Photos, timestamps, neighbor statements, and these, I slid another folder forward, are copies of your landscaping and maintenance contracts obtained under public disclosure law. Cordelia blinked. Those are confidential. Not under Section 209.005 of the Texas Property Code, I said evenly. You know, the one that requires financial transparency for all homeowner associations. The room went silent. Alina leaned closer, reading the first page. Her face went pale. These payments, she murmured, they're all to the same company. Pinnacle Property Services, I said, owned by Derek Blackthorne, your brother-in-law, Cordelia. Her pen froze midair. The mask cracked just for a second. Bob Morrison cleared his throat. That's highly irregular. Cordelia recovered fast. This is harassment. He's intimidating the board using legal threats. I call for a motion to restrict his attendance at meetings. Motion dies for lack of a second, Bob said quickly. Her glare could have cut glass. I stood collecting my papers. You've been running this community like your personal fiefdom. Selective enforcement, financial conflicts, harassment. That ends tonight. You can't threaten me, she hissed, rising from her chair. You don't have authority here. I paused at the doorway, letting the silence stretch, feeling every pair of eyes on us. Then I turned back just enough for my voice to carry. Cordelia, you really should have done your homework. What's that supposed to mean? She snapped. I looked her dead in the eye, calm as a man delivering a verdict. It means you just picked a fight with the municipal judge who signs off on your HOA's legal filings. The air went still. Even the buzzing lights seemed to stop. Alina's pen slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a faint clatter. Bob's jaw dropped slightly, like a man realizing he'd just witnessed the opening move of a war. Cordelia's lips parted, but no sound came out. Don't worry, I said softly. I won't abuse my position. I'll do this the right way. Then I walked out, the echo of my boots on tile sounding like gavel strikes. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. Across the street, porch lights flicked on one by one as words spread faster than wildfire. The judge had spoken. But this wasn't about power or revenge. It was about balance. About teaching people like Cordelia that fear only works until the wrong person stops being afraid. As I stood under the flickering street lamp, watching the moths circle the light, I realized something. The fight had just begun. And this time, the rules would finally apply to everyone. You can tell when someone's scared. Not by their words, by the silence between them. The week after that meeting, Cordelia didn't step foot outside her house. Her once perfect hedges grew wild, the white Lexus stayed parked, and her front blinds stayed closed like a fortress. But power doesn't retreat quietly. It recalibrates. The first strike came on a Thursday night, 10 p.m. sharp, a knock on my door that rattled the glass. Two sheriff's deputies stood there, serious-faced, flashlights reflecting off their badges. The taller one spoke first. Mr. Webb, we're here to serve a restraining order. For a moment, I thought they had the wrong address. Restraining order. He handed me a folder, my name bold at the top. Below it, the words stalking and intimidation of HOA board members. Cordelia's signature was right there. I stared at the paper, every line of legal nonsense sinking in like slow poison. According to her, I'd been following her car, making threats, and using my position in local government to terrorize innocent volunteers. It was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Almost. The deputies were polite, embarrassed even. We just deliver, sir, one said quietly. When they left, I sat on the porch steps for a long time, the night pressing heavy around me. The cicadas had gone silent. The world felt smaller somehow. But then, slowly, I started to smile. This wasn't fear, this was panic, hers, not mine. And panic makes people sloppy. By morning, I'd called my old colleague, Patricia Valdez, one of the sharpest prosecutors I'd ever worked with. She filed it in Riverside County, I told her, trying to get out from under my jurisdiction. Patricia chuckled. Smart but not smart enough, want me to sit in. Just watch, I said. This one I'll handle myself. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Cordelia walked into that courtroom like she was auditioning for a drama she didn't understand. Designer blazer, folder clutched to her chest like a shield. Her lawyer, young, slick, expensive, strutted beside her. He started with a performance worthy of an award. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing dramatically, "my client has endured relentless harassment, intimidation, and abuse from this man, a judge who has weaponized his office to terrify a volunteer HOA president simply trying to do her job." He had charts, diagrams, even screenshots of my fence photos, claiming they were surveillance images. Patricia was watching from the back row, trying not to laugh. When it was my turn, I didn't match his theatrics. I didn't need to. I just laid out the truth, calm, factual, methodical. A timeline of harassment, screenshots of her emails, recordings of her threats, voicemails where she called me, quote, "an arrogant little dictator with a hammer and robe." Then I dropped the financials. HOA payments to her brother-in-law's company, Pinnacle Property Services, duplicate invoices, identical signatures, same date, different amounts, and the kicker, landscaping repairs billed twice for the same day. Her lawyer's confident smirk evaporated. Cordelia sat frozen, face pale under the courtroom lights. Judge Henley, an old colleague of mine, calm and fair, looked over her glasses and sighed. "This," she said, "is not only without merit, it borders on perjury." Then the gavel fell, motion denied, sanctions imposed, and Cordelia ordered to cover my legal costs. That sound, wood meeting wood, echoed like thunder in my chest. Outside the courthouse, Patricia clapped me on the shoulder. "You know," she said, grinning, "you could have told me you were going to end her career in under 15 minutes. I would have brought popcorn." But I wasn't celebrating, not yet, because I knew Cordelia wouldn't stop at humiliation. People like her never do, they double down. And I was right. Within days, flyers appeared on doorsteps, anonymous, but everyone knew the handwriting. "Judge abuses power to threaten volunteers," the headline screamed. The ink bled in the morning dew, leaving black fingerprints on mailboxes like a stain that wouldn't wash away. Social media accounts popped up overnight, fake profiles with names like Concerned Resident 87 and Maplewood Mom. They posted lies, doctored screenshots, twisted half-truths. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't need to shout. Marcus dropped off a beer one evening, holding one of the flyers between two fingers. "She's losing it," he said. Mrs. Chen joined us a few minutes later, her voice trembling with anger. She called the city about my gnomes again, said they're symbols of defiance. We laughed, the kind of tired, bitter laugh that comes from surviving too long under someone's thumb. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. Cordelia had turned an entire neighborhood into a battlefield of intimidation and fear. And if someone didn't stop her, she'd keep doing it until Maplewood Estates became her personal kingdom of misery. So I made a decision. No more defense, no more waiting. It was time to go on offense, by the book, line by line, law by law. I opened a fresh file on my desk that night, labeling it in black ink. Blackthorn v. Maplewood HOA Fraud Inquiry. The sound of the pen scratching on paper was almost soothing. Every name, every contract, every invoice went in. The evidence was already there, all it needed was structure. Then I called Patricia again. "I think I've got enough for a criminal inquiry," I told her. "You always did have a flair for drama," she said, half laughing. "You're sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure," I said quietly. "Not because I have to, because no one else will." When I hung up, I looked out the window. The neighborhood was still, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. Porch lights glowed faintly. Somewhere, a dog barked in the distance. And in that silence, I realized something simple but powerful. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, it's about showing people that the truth can outlast fear. Cordelia thought she'd buried me under lies and paperwork. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the shovel I'd used to dig up her entire empire. The morning after I filed that fraud inquiry, Maplewood Estates felt different. The air had a hum to it, quiet, expectant, like the few seconds before a summer storm breaks open the sky. Cordelia's white Lexus still sat in her driveway, but the blinds that once snapped open to monitor every neighbor stayed shut. Fear makes people hide. Guilt makes them paranoid. I spent that week doing what Cordelia never thought I would, listening. Marcus had stories, invoices for repairs that never happened. Mrs. Chen produced a stack of fine notices so tall it looked like a short novel. And Earl, a retired veteran from the far end of the cul-de-sac, had letters threatening to remove his American flag for non-compliance with uniform decor standards. I sat with each of them on back porches and in quiet kitchens, the smell of coffee mixing with frustration and disbelief. These weren't rebels. They were ordinary people who'd been bullied into silence by paperwork. One by one, they started bringing me evidence. Photos, receipts, old letters. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other were now united by one thing, anger that had finally found a purpose. That weekend, Marcus hosted what we jokingly called the underground meeting. His patio lights flickered as people arrived one by one, glancing over their shoulders like we were plotting a heist instead of community reform. Lawn chairs creaked, beers cracked open, and for the first time in months, laughter slipped through the tension. I took a slow breath and looked around at the faces, tired, wary, but determined. "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about accountability. Every one of you deserves to live in a neighborhood that doesn't treat you like suspects." Mrs. Chen nodded, her frail hands folded in her lap. "We just want peace," she whispered. "Then we do this right," I said. "No shouting, no vandalism, no corner cutting. We win this with truth and paper, not noise and anger." That night, the resistance began. I drafted open records requests, citing every statute and subsection that forced transparency. Patricia helped me prepare formal complaints to the state's HOA regulatory division. I organized files on my laptop labeled contracts, fines, complaints, victims. Every folder filled faster than the last. But I also knew Cordelia would strike back, and she did. By Wednesday, anonymous calls flooded the building department claiming illegal electrical work in my garage. The police showed up again, polite, apologetic. "We're just following up, Judge." I showed them the permits signed, sealed, and dated. They smiled. "Looks good, sir." Cordelia must have watched from her window because the next morning my fence was tagged in red spray paint. Abuser. I left it there for 2 days, a scar, a symbol, and maybe a warning to anyone watching. The truth doesn't need to hide behind fresh paint. Meanwhile, the evidence was piling up faster than even I'd expected. Patricia called one night, her voice alive with energy. "You were right," she said. "That landscaping company, Pinnacle Property Services, I ran the registration. It's tied to Cordelia's brother-in-law and 3 separate bank accounts, all routing HOA payments into the same destination." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight. "That's money laundering." "Or embezzlement," she said. "Either way, it's criminal, and I'm putting together a case file that'll make your old courtroom days look tame." For the first time in months, I slept through the night. But the neighborhood wasn't sleeping. You could feel something awakening, people reclaiming pieces of themselves. Marcus started keeping a log of every noise complaint and false citation, timestamps and all. Mrs. Chen went door to door, collecting signatures from residents willing to demand an audit. Even Bob Morrison, the insurance agent on the board, called me quietly one night. "Judge," he said, voice trembling, "I think you're right. The numbers don't make sense. I don't want to be part of this anymore." I told him the truth, then help us fix it. By the next week, I had everything I needed: financial inconsistencies, contractor fraud, selective enforcement, and written witness statements from 10 residents. Enough to justify a full state investigation. And then, something happened that told me Cordelia was finally cracking. She called an emergency board meeting. 9 p.m., no notice, no agenda. I showed up anyway. The community center was nearly empty except for Cordelia, her vice president Sandra Mueller, and Frank Delacro, the treasurer who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Cordelia's perfume hit first, thick and suffocating. Her smile followed, sharp as broken glass. "Judge Webb," she said, emphasizing the title like a curse. "We've decided your attendance is no longer welcome at HOA meetings due to conflict of interest." I stared at her for a moment, then spoke softly. "You can't remove a homeowner from meetings. That's illegal under state code." She waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure you'll find a way to argue it, dear. You usually do." Sandra shifted uncomfortably. Frank rubbed his temples. I set a sealed envelope on the table. "You might want to read that before you make any more illegal moves. It's a subpoena for financial disclosure from the district prosecutor's office." For the first time since I'd met her, Cordelia's mask slipped completely. Her smile vanished, her voice faltered. You went to the DA." "I didn't have to," I said. "They came to me." The silence that followed was the sound of fear turning into realization. The queen bee had finally been cornered. When I walked out, the night air felt lighter. The stars over Maplewood looked clearer than they had in months. At home, I stood by the window, watching porch lights flicker on one by one. The neighborhood wasn't scared anymore. People waved. Curtains opened. Doors stayed unlocked again. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the tide had turned. Because when a community remembers its own power, no HOA president, no bully, and no fraud can hold it hostage forever. And as for Cordelia Blackthorne, she'd spent years ruling this neighborhood through fear. Now she was about to learn what happens when fear changes sides. The subpoena changed everything. By Monday morning, the whispers had turned into open conversation. The HOA email list, once a weapon in Cordelia's hands, was now a battlefield of rumors and revelations. Someone leaked the news of the district attorney's inquiry, and by noon, the whole neighborhood knew. I didn't have to lift a finger. Truth moves on its own once you give it air. Cordelia tried to control the fire, of course. She sent out a frantic community update filled with legal buzzwords, pending clarification, procedural misunderstanding, temporary audit delay. But no one was buying it, not anymore. Marcus told me the HOA office had been swarmed all morning. Homeowners demanding to see the books, asking for refunds, threatening lawsuits. And through it all, Cordelia stayed hidden behind her locked office door. That night, as I stepped outside to bring in the trash bins, I noticed something strange. Her Lexus was gone. For the first time since she moved in, her driveway was empty. The house dark, curtains drawn tight. It would have been easy to think she'd fled, but I knew better. Cordelia wasn't the type to run, not yet. She was plotting. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. "Patricia." "You sitting down?" she asked. "I am now." She exhaled. The DA's office opened a formal fraud investigation. Multiple counts. Financial misconduct, falsified contracts, misuse of community funds, and your friend Cordelia is at the center of all of it. I didn't say anything for a while. Just listened to the sound of my coffee maker sputtering in the background. "How solid?" I finally asked. "Solid enough that they've issued a preliminary freeze on HOA accounts. She can't access a dime until the audit clears." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for: relief. But relief has a way of coming with warning bells. Because people like Cordelia, cornered, desperate, they don't go quietly. Around noon, Marcus came knocking. His expression was tight, jaw clenched. "You need to see this," he said, handing me a folded flyer. Across the top, bold red letters screamed, "Neighborhood under siege. Rogue judge destroys HOA." The rest was pure venom, twisting the facts, calling me corrupt, claiming I'd falsified evidence and manipulated the DA's office for personal revenge. It was signed anonymously, but I didn't need a signature. The font, the phrasing, it reeked of Cordelia. I almost laughed. "Desperation looks ugly in print," I said. But Marcus wasn't smiling. "She's dropping them at every door, half the neighborhood, talking." I nodded slowly. Let them talk. By evening, the flyers were gone, swept into garbage cans, torn in half, or burned in backyard fire pits. People had stopped believing her. Truth, once it catches light, burns through lies faster than gossip can spread. 2 days later, the first investigator came by, a calm, sharp-eyed man in a gray suit named Detective Alvarez. We sat at my kitchen table while he sifted through the mountain of evidence I'd gathered. He was methodical, polite, and surprisingly candid. "You've done half my work for me," he said. "If these documents check out, and they will, this could go beyond local prosecution. State-level fraud, maybe even tax evasion." He closed the folder and looked up at me. "How'd you keep so calm through all this, Judge?" I smiled faintly, because panic is the one thing she wanted and the one thing I refused to give her. Alvarez grinned. "I wish more people thought like that." As the investigation deepened, cracks began appearing everywhere. Sandra Mueller, the HOA vice president, resigned abruptly, citing ethical differences. Frank Delacro, the treasurer, confessed that Cordelia had forged his signature on multiple checks. He even turned over his email records, detailing months of pressure and threats. By the third week, it wasn't just the DA involved. The state attorney general's office sent representatives to audit the HOA's finances. 2 unmarked cars showed up one morning and spent hours inside the community center. Neighbors watched from their lawns in stunned silence. Mrs. Chen called me afterward, voice trembling with excitement. "They took boxes, dear, boxes full of papers. I saw them." That night I walked the quiet streets of Maplewood. Porch lights glowed warm and steady. For the first time, people waved instead of whispering. Kids played on driveways without their parents worrying about noise complaints. It was like watching a neighborhood wake from a long, bad dream. Still, part of me couldn't relax. Cordelia was silent, yes, but silence from her wasn't peace. It was calculation. And I was right again. One evening, just as twilight settled and the sky turned copper, I heard footsteps on my porch. Not the nervous shuffle of a neighbor, but confident, deliberate steps. When I opened the door, Cordelia stood there, pale, furious, her perfect composure cracked wide open. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I didn't answer. "You ruined me?" Her voice quivered between anger and desperation. "You've turned everyone against me. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I looked her in the eye. "Yes, I do, because that's exactly what you did to them." For a moment, something in her face flickered, recognition, maybe. The briefest glimpse of guilt before pride buried it again. "You think the law protects you," she said softly. "But laws change, people change, power shifts." "Not truth," I said. "That doesn't change." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Her heels clicked down the porch steps, sharp and fatting, until the sound disappeared into the night. The next morning, her Lexus was gone for good. Weeks passed. The investigation moved fast now, accelerated by confessions and paper trails. Patricia called me one evening, voice steady, but waited. "The DA filed charges today," she said. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, falsifying financial records, and obstruction. She's facing serious time." I didn't celebrate, just sat quietly, listening to the wind through the oaks. Because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, the kind that feels like peace settling in after a long storm. But this story wasn't over yet, not until Maplewood itself healed, not until the neighborhood learned how to live without fear again. And that part that would take more than the law, that would take heart. The first hearing came on a rainy Monday morning. Gray clouds pressed low over the courthouse, the kind of sky that feels like it's holding its breath. I parked 2 blocks away, walked the wet pavement in silence, and listened to the sound of tires hissing over puddles. It had been months since that first morning with the police cars, months since Cordelia's perfume filled my yard like a warning, and now it was all leading here. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors filled the benches, whispering softly, their umbrellas dripping onto the floor. Some came out of anger, some out of curiosity, and a few, like Mrs. Chen, out of quiet solidarity. When Cordelia walked in, she wasn't the same woman. Gone was the sharp confidence, the crisp white suit, the air of invincibility. Her hair hung flat, and her eyes looked smaller somehow, the look of someone who'd spent too many nights awake, waiting for a knock that finally came. She sat down beside her attorney, but the silence in the room spoke louder than any accusation. The prosecutor laid everything out like clockwork. Embezzlement, falsified contracts, misused HOA funds. It wasn't just messy bookkeeping. It was theft, plain and simple. And as each document appeared on the screen, her signature, her approval, her voice on recorded calls, you could almost hear the weight of denial breaking down. Cordelia barely looked up. When the judge read the potential sentence, she flinched like the sound itself hurt. I knew that look. I'd seen it 100 times before from the bench, the moment someone realizes that consequences aren't abstract anymore. They're real. When the gavel came down, the words echoed through me like a sigh that had waited too long. Remanded for trial. Outside, the rain had stopped. Patches of blue sky were breaking through the clouds. The neighbors gathered quietly in the courtyard, no cheers, no shouts, just a strange kind of peace. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "Feels like the air's lighter," he said. Mrs. Chen smiled faintly. "Maybe now we can plant flowers again without permission." I laughed, but it wasn't the triumphant kind. It was softer, tired, almost sad, because victories like this don't come without scars. The weeks that followed felt surreal. The HOA's control was suspended. The state appointed a neutral trustee to manage operations until elections could be held. Flyers stopped appearing, fines were frozen, and the neighborhood slowly began to breathe again. Kids started playing outside without worried parents peeking through blinds. Porch lights glowed later at night. People actually waved when they saw each other. One evening, Marcus hosted a barbecue, the kind of casual gathering that had vanished from Maplewood years ago. The smell of charcoal and grilled meat drifted through the cul-de-sac, mixing with laughter that sounded almost foreign after so much tension. I stood off to the side, plate in hand, watching the light bounce off smiling faces. And for the first time, I felt something settle deep in my chest, something quiet, steady, peace. Patricia showed up halfway through, dressed casual for once, holding a plate of ribs and a mischievous grin. "You realize," she said, "you just dismantled an entire corruption ring using barbecue diplomacy and city code citations." I chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." She nodded toward the street where kids were riding bikes under the setting sun. "You should. This place looks alive again." We stood there for a while, listening to the sound of normal life returning, the clink of glasses, a dog barking in the distance, the low hum of conversation. And it hit me how much fear had stolen from this neighborhood, how much of life people had put on hold just to avoid conflict. Cordelia's trial came and went. The evidence spoke louder than any plea. She took a deal: 5 years probation, restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. Some called it too lenient, but to me it was enough, because punishment isn't always about pain, sometimes it's about permanence, and the one thing Cordelia could never regain was power. After the sentencing, I ran into her one last time, purely by chance. I was leaving the courthouse, and she was sitting on a bench outside, waiting for her ride. For a moment, we just looked at each other. The noise of the street faded, and all I saw was a woman who'd built her life on control, now hollowed out by the absence of it. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said quietly. "I just wanted order, respect." I nodded. "That's the problem with power," I said. "It starts with good intentions, then it gets hungry." She looked down, eyes glistening. "You hate me, don't you?" I shook my head. "No, I pity you." Her lips trembled. "You took everything from me." "No," I said gently. "You took it from yourself. I just held up a mirror." Then I walked away, the echo of my footsteps fading into the sound of traffic and wind. That night I sat on my porch again, the same porch where this all began. The wood creaked softly under my chair, and the smell of rain lingered in the air. The fence stood firm, sunlight-worn and simple, the way I'd built it months ago. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like peace. I watched the last light fade from the horizon, the world settling into quiet calm, and thought about how thin the line really is between order and oppression, between leading and controlling. In the distance, I could hear Marcus laughing, Mrs. Chen's wind chimes dancing in the breeze, and the faint hiss of a sprinkler watering the lawns. Simple sounds, human sounds. It reminded me of something I used to tell young lawyers. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. And maybe that's what this all was. Not a war, not revenge. Just balance returning to a place that had forgotten what it felt like. But even as peace settled in, I knew one thing for certain: the story of Maplewood wasn't over yet. Because when people have lived too long in fear, freedom takes time to learn again. It's strange how quiet victory can feel. Months had passed since the trial, but Maplewood still carried the faint echo of everything that happened, like the aftertaste of smoke long after a fire gone out. The lawns were greener now, fences mended, driveways swept clean. Yet sometimes, in the stillness of early morning, I could still feel the weight of what used to hang over this neighborhood. I'd started walking the block each dawn. Just me, the hum of sprinklers, and the faint smell of dew on asphalt. It had become a ritual, one I never planned but somehow needed. A reminder that peace isn't loud, it's built, one quiet morning at a time. On one of those walks, I passed the old community center. The door was open, sunlight spilling across the freshly painted walls. Inside, a small group of neighbors sat around folding tables covered in notebooks and coffee cups. A new HOA board, democratically elected this time, was holding its first open meeting. Marcus saw me in the doorway and waved me in. "Come on, Judge, you helped us build this." I smiled, shaking my head. "You don't need me now, that's the point." Mrs. Chen stood near the coffee pot, her favorite floral sweater bright against the pale light. "At least stay for cookies," she said. So I did. I listened as they discussed budgets, community events, landscaping bids, real business, not power games. Every word was calm, measured, respectful. It was the sound of a neighborhood finally learning to breathe on its own. When the meeting ended, Marcus walked me out to the parking lot. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that makes even cracked asphalt look beautiful. "You ever think about moving?" he asked suddenly. I looked around at the houses, the repaired fences, the laughter drifting from open windows, the faint music from someone's backyard speaker. "Not anymore," I said. He nodded. "I guess this place finally feels like home." As I walked back toward my house, I passed the lot where Cordelia's Lexus used to gleam. The house had sold, new family, new start. The flower beds were overgrown, but in the middle of the yard I noticed something small and unexpected. A single white rose blooming against the fence line. I don't know if the new owners planted it or if it survived from before, but something about it felt symbolic. Fragile, defiant, alive. That night the air carried the faint hum of crickets and the low murmur of life returning to normal. I sat on the porch again, same wooden chair, same view, but it all looked different now. The mailbox across the street wasn't a target anymore, just a mailbox. The fence I'd built, the one that started all of this, wasn't just wood and nails. It was a reminder that some boundaries are worth standing up for. Patricia called around 9. "DA closed the case today," she said. "Full restitution collected. The new board's officially recognized. You did it." I laughed quietly. "No, we did it." She paused, then said softly, "You ever miss the bench?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think this neighborhood taught me something courtrooms never could." "What's that?" "That justice doesn't always wear robes. Sometimes it wears work boots and drinks bad coffee at HOA meetings." She laughed. "You should put that on a plaque." After we hung up, I stayed on the porch a while longer, just watching the stars rise. The air smelled like cedar and rain, the wind soft against my face. And for the first time in years, I felt completely still, no anger, no unfinished business, just gratitude. But stories like this don't end with victory. They end with understanding. Because the truth is, I didn't win anything. I just reminded people of what they already had: a voice, a choice, a right to stand tall even when someone tries to make them small. Sometimes I think about Cordelia, where she went, what she tells herself when she looks back. Maybe she learned something too, or maybe not. Some lessons don't come easy. But I like to believe that somewhere inside her, she finally understood that control and respect aren't the same thing. One demands, the other earns. The night deepened. Porch lights flickered one by one across Maplewood, little pockets of gold in the dark. A dog barked once, then quieted. The world settled. I thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the anger, the long road to peace, and realized it wasn't just a story about an HOA or a power-hungry neighbor. It was about something bigger. About what happens when ordinary people remember they don't have to bow to intimidation. About how justice doesn't need to roar. It just needs to keep standing quietly until the noise fades. As I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaked beneath me, same as it had that first day. Only now the sound didn't echo in tension, it sang in peace. Somewhere down the block, a gate swung shut with a soft metallic clang, and I smiled. That sound, simple, ordinary, felt like closure. Maybe that's how every fight for truth ends. Not with applause, not with grand speeches, but with the calm return of everyday sounds, crickets, laughter, and the hum of a neighborhood finally free. The stars blinked above me, faint but steady, like reminders that even the smallest light can outlast the longest dark. And as the wind carried the faint scent of grass and rain through the air, I whispered to no one in particular, maybe to the night itself. Sometimes the real victory isn't proving you're right. It's living in peace after everyone knows the truth. Then I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and let the quiet have the last word. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.